Welcome into the Commanders Report. I'm your host, Jack Sperry. Today we got some bad news on the injury front heading into this week's game versus the Seattle Seahawks, guys. We'll cover that at the top of today's show. But then, should the Washington Commanders go all in to go get a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., where a new report suggests that he could be available via trade before the NFL trade deadline? Of course, he played with Jayden Daniels in college. Could be an electric duo for many years to come here in Washington. I'll discuss the possibility of that later in today's show, so make sure you guys stick around. But before we get into the content today, kick us off down there in the comment section by answering this question. Will the Commanders pull off any sort of trade before the trade deadline next week? Give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section, whether you think the Commanders might be buyers or whether they might be sellers. Just let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section if you think they're going to pull off any sort of trade before the deadline. Now, unfortunately, Terry McLaurin will be out once again here. Of course, he came back last week versus the Chiefs on Monday Night Football. He re-aggravated, unfortunately, that quad injury that has kept him out for so many weeks, and now he's officially going to be missing yet another game this season with that quad injury, according to head coach Dan Quinn. And, of course, with this pivotal game versus the Seattle Seahawks coming up on Sunday Night Football, you would have really liked to have Terry McLaurin because he makes some really fantastic catches. He made a couple in that game versus the Chiefs. And to not have, your number one receiver and, frankly, by far your number one receiver on this roster out there, it's been a big blow to this Commanders offense over the last several weeks and, over a month at this point. And, it just sucks because whenever you get Jayden Daniels back, now Terry McLaurin's out of the lineup. That's really frustrating being a Washington Commanders fan. But Dan Quinn did say in his press conference today that this isn't considered a long-term injury. It was more of a tweak than more of like a true re-aggravation, and he's going to be out like another 5 games or anything like that. It's more seen as like a 1, maybe 2 game absence type of tweak. And we'll have to see how things go in the weeks to come. But, we've seen Coach Quinn be very optimistic about Terry McLaurin's injury statuses over the weeks, and then he doesn't play for another 3 weeks, right? So I don't know how much we can take Quinn at his word here. But, his initial reaction to this seems a bit optimistic in terms of the short-term prospects of him being able to come back. But he also said that the team is comfortable, quote-unquote comfortable, with the wide receivers in the room behind Terry McLaurin. And, you still got Deebo Samuel, who is back healthy, or quote-unquote healthy, still kind of hurting a little bit with that heel injury, but he's kind of playing through that right now. And then behind him, you got guys like Luke McCaffrey, who I think this team should absolutely be playing more of. I said that in my takeaways video yesterday. Jalen Lane kind of has a drop issue, but he's got some really nasty double moves, and he can be a deep threat. Chris Moore has had some nice games and some nice moments, but he's had some drop issues. They just re-signed Robbie Chosen back to the practice squad. You do have Ja'Cory Brooks still there, and then you also have Traylon Burks, who you could think about elevating as well. But certainly I think with Terry McLaurin out, I think that means Luke McCaffrey should be the guy that, is elevated in this group. And then also I think Chris Moore should probably be the number 3 type of guy, with Deebo Samuel, of course, in that mix as well. Obviously, you'd much rather have your true alpha number 1 wide receiver out there. And it's just so frustrating that you can't get Jayden Daniels and Terry McLaurin on the practice field or on the playing field together this year. McLaurin, of course, sat out a majority of training camp this year in preseason with his contract dispute, and then you only get about a week and a half of practices before you play the Giants week 1. They only get 2 weeks together, and then Jayden gets injured, and then McLaurin gets injured the week after that, and then last week McLaurin's back, but Jayden's out of the lineup, and now Jayden's back, but Terry's out of the lineup. It's just musical chairs out there, and we've seen. And we've said at the beginning of the season how important this dynamic duo is for the Commanders' offense to get back to the prowess that they showed last year. And I think a big reason why this Commanders' offense isn't nearly where it was last year is because you don't have Jayden Daniels and you don't have Terry McLaurin on the field at the same time and in a rhythm like they were much of last season. So that's really disappointing. But some other injury updates here. Jayden is going to be a full participant in practice this week. He almost certainly will play versus the Seattle Seahawks on Sunday night. Laramie Tunsil is going to be questionable to play this week with a hamstring injury. Brandon Coleman would presumably start at left tackle if he can't go. And then Matt Gay, still dealing with that back injury, is also questionable to play this week. I would probably assume if he can't go, they'll just re-sign Matthew Wright for that football game, who they released earlier this week. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comment section. Is it too early to say that Terry McLaurin's extension was a mistake? Give me a yes if you think it's too early to say that, or type no if you think that it's already a mistake to give Terry McLaurin that extension. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section. In just a second here, I'm going to tell you about one of our new sponsors here on the Commanders Report, which is Harry's. While I'm telling you about one of our new sponsors today, simply give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section. And now let's have a word from our sponsor today, which is Harry's. And I don't have to tell you guys that maneuvering the men's razor space these days is a little bit of a nightmare. The quality products are always super expensive, and refills are always ridiculously expensive as well. Then when you try to save a little bit of money, you get stuck with dull razors that irritate your skin. That's exactly why I switched to Harry's Plus, and I haven't looked back since. Harry's Plus has an advanced pivoting system to reach every corner of your face. It has a refined blade to tech for closer, smoother shaves, plus a weighted metal handle, which is the heaviest that Harry's has ever had, for added control and comfort. But I think the best part about Harry's Plus is how affordable it is. Harry's owns their own world-class blade factory in Germany, no outsourcing, no middlemen, and because they control the entire process themselves from steel to shelf, they keep costs low and pass the savings on to you, the customer. And if you don't love your shave, Harry's will make it right. No questions asked. Their risk-free trial means there's zero downside to giving them a shot. Now, I actually have my own Harry's Plus razor here that I brought to show you guys here today. It's got this metal handle on there. It's got that pivoting point on there. So it's just super comfortable. And then also they got German-engineered blades in their razor heads, which is just absolutely fantastic. High-quality stuff. So you get a barbershop quality shave every single time. But because Harry's controls the entire process from manufacturing all the way into the shelf, you don't have to break the bank to get a really high-quality shave in your bathroom every single week. So for a limited time only, our listeners get the Harry's Plus trial set for only $10 at harrys.com/chat. This set includes the all-new Harry's Plus razor that I just showed you guys, one refined 5-blade cartridge, a 2-ounce foaming shave gel, and a travel cover to protect your blades on the go. Just head on over to harrys.com/chat to claim this offer, and after you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them that we sent you. A big thank you to Harry's for sponsoring today's edition of the Commanders Report. So now let's dive into this report here from Diana Russini from The Athletic, claiming that the Jacksonville Jaguars are open to trading Brian Thomas Jr., first-round pick in just last year's NFL draft, and may have potential to be a top 10, if not a top 5 receiver someday in this league, which is really a crazy report here because this would be one of the first times ever where a receiver that has been this productive in just the second year of his career would be dealt in a potential trade. So this is really unprecedented. And, there's certainly a conversation going on right now on Commanders Twitter, etc. Should the Commanders go all in to acquire him? Because if the Commanders are going to go all in on a wide receiver, it would make sense to go in on a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., who has multiple years left of cost-controlled money on his rookie contract. Also, he's only 23 years old, and he's got established chemistry with current quarterback of the Commanders, Jayden Daniels. They were college teammates back at LSU. This was the report from Diana Russini saying the Jaguars are listening on calls for wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr., even if a move feels highly unlikely. They're also shopping for defense. Okay, so listen, okay. Adding BTJ is a really fun idea. I think, he's a super explosive player. He's got great size. He's got really oily hips for somebody of his size, and that really what makes him special and what really elevates, his ceiling as a player. Because if he can even take his route running to an even higher level, I already think it's pretty good. But if he can really go from good route runner to great route runner mixed with his elite speed, he's a 4.3 speed guy. He can track the ball in the air down the field. He can wrestle balls away from defenders in 50-50 ball situations. If he can take that next step, and he has the athletic tools to be able to take that next step as a route runner, he could go from already maybe a top 25, top 20 receiver in the game today to top 10 or even top 5 5 truly elite wide receiver in the next few years. And you guys can see in his rookie season, he was absolutely phenomenal. I mean, in most years, this would be good enough for Offensive Rookie of the Year. And, of course, his college teammate Jayden Daniels was able to win that trophy. But over 1,200 yards receiving in just his first season in the league, over 14 yards per reception and double-digit touchdowns. Just an unbelievable season. And you have to think about who's throwing in the football. Trevor Lawrence on a down year, Mac Jones, Brian Thomas Jr. putting up this kind of production in his first year at that level of quarterback play. It just shows just how good of a player he already is, and the fact that he can get even better, in my opinion, should scare the living crap out of the rest of the National Football League. And reuniting him with Jayden Daniels here in Washington would be absolutely electric, and pairing him up with Terry McLaurin as the veteran piece. And because he's on his rookie contract, you can afford to pay both Terry McLaurin and Brian Thomas Jr. And then when eventually Terry McLaurin's time has come and, you eventually move on from him, Brian Thomas Jr. then can easily transition. And at that point, you're probably expecting him to be one of the best receivers in the National Football League. So on paper and from a football perspective, it's really a fun idea. It's very interesting. And it's one that, you can certainly dream about as a Washington Commanders fan. But I think that's about as far as this thing's going to go. All right. I highly, highly, highly doubt that the Washington Commanders will trade for Brian Thomas Jr. And frankly, guys, I highly doubt that the Jaguars will trade Brian Thomas Jr. to anybody before the NFL trade deadline this year, because he is so young and his upside is so dang high. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me that they would even be listening on calls for Brian Thomas Jr. before the NFL trade deadline. But there's a couple of reasons why I think that the Commanders will not land him in a trade. The first reason is I don't think the Commanders are buying at the NFL trade deadline this year. I don't think that they're looking to add players, even though this guy, still a very young player, could help them in the future, and that's kind of the type of player the Commanders are looking for. Right now, the Commanders are 3-5. They're third in the NFC East, and before next week's trade deadline, they could very easily be 3-6. They're playing another playoff caliber team this week in the Seattle Seahawks, and if they lose on Sunday, and as we've discussed, you don't have Terry McLaurin, I would say the Seattle Seahawks should definitely be favored in that ball game. You're looking at 3-6 in the face, which essentially means that your season is all but done here in Washington. And then you look at the draft picks next year, and they certainly are going to have to embrace the youth movement in the years to come. Bobby Wagner's, he's done. Marshawn Lattimore, you're going to have to move on from him. You got a lot of veterans on this team, and you're going to have to start injecting this roster with more young talent. And if you're trading, a high draft pick, and you would have to trade a high draft pick for Brian Thomas Jr., you're not going to have a whole lot of picks to be able to, replenish this roster with young talent with. And I just don't think Washington is looking to unload any more of their draft picks. They've already unloaded some of these picks for Laramie Tunsil and Marshawn Lattimore and all that stuff. And you don't have your second-round pick next year. You don't have your fourth-round pick next year. And if you trade away, your first or your third-round pick next year for Brian Thomas Jr., that's even less draft picks in the early rounds that you have at your disposal. And the second reason why I think that Brian Thomas Jr. will not be a Commander this year is because Jacksonville's price is probably absurdly high, okay? Like, it is insanely high, and this is why I think Diana Russini is saying that it's highly unlikely that a trade is going to happen, okay? I think the Jaguars are listening to trade offers, but I think they want at least a first-round pick in exchange for Brian Thomas Jr., and they probably want even more than a first-round draft pick, okay? They probably want a first-round pick and a starting caliber defensive player, or a first-round pick and a third-round pick. Like, they probably have a very, very high price tag because they understand that Brian Thomas Jr. is an insanely valuable prospect to potentially trade, because he's one, really, really good, and he has the potential to be even better down the line here. He's only 23 years old, so the team acquiring him is getting a young potential superstar at the wide receiver position, and then also you get 3 or more years of cost control on his rookie contract, depending on if the team takes on his 5th-year option, which they likely will. So, it's more like 4 more years of cost-controlled rookie contract for Brian Thomas Jr. It's almost like you drafted Brian Thomas Jr. this year in like the 2nd round. You get 4 years of him, right? So it's just an insanely valuable prospect here and player in Brian Thomas Jr. because of his youth, because of his contract, because of how good he is. And I think that the Jaguars, if they're going to unload him, are going to need like maybe even 2 first-round draft picks in order to unload him. And I think that's exactly why Russini, like I mentioned earlier, calls this quote-unquote highly unlikely in her own report because she probably has heard what they're asking for him, and she's like, I don't see any team giving that up. And honestly, man, I'm good at wide receiver at this current moment in time. I think that, obviously missing Terry McLaurin this week sucks and all that stuff, but it doesn't sound like a long-term injury. And when Terry McLaurin is healthy, I kind of do like the setup that the Washington Commanders have in the wide receiver room, okay? And now obviously Noah Brown is on IR, all that stuff, but Luke McCaffrey has shown some really good things this year. Robbie Chosen, I think, has actually shown some good things. Chris Moore's had flashes. And, of course, you got Deebo Samuel as your number 2 receiver, as your kind of gadget piece. So as long as you can just get Terry McLaurin back and keep him healthy, I think this is a more than serviceable wide receiver room for the time being. And I'm sure, with Deebo on a 1-year contract, he likely won't be back next year. You're probably going to be addressing wide receiver pretty early in the NFL draft next year, all right? But I think that you want to have that flexibility to be able to do what you want to do next spring and have the resources at your disposal. And, of course, I don't think the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to let him go in talking about Brian Thomas Jr. for any reasonable price tag. But let me know what you guys think. If the price tag is a first-round pick next year for Brian Thomas Jr., would you accept that trade? Keep in mind, you only have 1 pick in the first 4 rounds of the draft. If that ends up being the case, and that would be a 3rd-round pick for the Washington Commanders next year. So type A for accept or D for decline. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. And that's going to be it for today's edition of the Commanders Report by Chat Sports. Make sure you guys type those real ones down there in the comments section. If you made it to the end of today's program, when you guys watch the end of the show, that really helps us out and helps out the YouTube algorithm. So when you guys make it to the end, it really does help us out, guys. So if you made it to the end today, I want to give you some love down there in the comment section. Type those real ones if you made it to the end. And also, if you are a real one and you made it to the end today, you might as well click that subscribe button if you haven't already. We provide you guys free, informative, and entertaining Commanders content just like today's video every single day on this channel. So if you haven't already, click that subscribe button. Greatly appreciate all of your guys' support. And until next time, guys, hail to the Commanders.